Welcome back to the Arsenal Transfer Room, the best place on the internet to get the latest Arsenal transfer news and gossip without all of the absolute nonsense. Today, we're talking Rodrygo, Dean Huijsen, and Viktor Gyokeres. But before we get into it, if I could just ask you to subscribe. We're on the way now to 17,000 subscribers. The channel's going to be flying throughout the summer. And if you could click the like button down below, I would be massively grateful. It helps the channel and it doesn't cost you anything. Look, let's get into it. Starting with Dean Huijsen. This news coming out today from Plettigol, who is a reliable source. He says Arsenal and Liverpool are currently the frontrunners to sign Dean Huijsen, while Real Madrid remain keen. A decision on the player's future is expected soon. Dean Huijsen's £50 million release clause can be paid in 3 installments. Now, with that, you have to be careful with confusing it with PSR. So people think that's good for PSR. It makes no difference to PSR. 50 million quid is 50 million quid. We can amortize it over 5 years if we want to. The 3 installments is to do with cash flow. It just makes it easier for Arsenal to actually have the money to pay it rather than paying 50 million quid up front, even though that 50 million quid would be spread on the books over 5 years, if that makes sense. But on Huijsen, there was some other news from Fabrizio, so we'll kind of balance it out. He says more on Dean Huijsen. Real Madrid know the player dreams of the move as internal talks are taking place with Xabi Alonso on a new centre-back. Chelsea, Liverpool and Arsenal are ready to trigger the £50 million release clause, getting the deal done this month, trying to agree with the players' camp. Race open. So Fabrizio not leaning into the idea that it's Liverpool and Arsenal leading the race. I do think if Real Madrid go for him, he will go for them. And ultimately, it's whether or not they want to pay 50 million quid or if they'll wait to try and get Kanate on a free, as an example, next summer. But for Huijsen, for me, it's a no-brainer. It really is a no-brainer. You're talking about a guy who is 20 years old, only turned 20 last month, by the way, looks exceptionally good on the ball, which we know any Arsenal centre-back is going to have to be. He's tall, he's rangy, he carries it well, he's confident. 1v1 defending, I think he's pretty good. Obviously, the ceiling is massive. And for me, I look at Kivior and I look at Huijsen and I say, if you can get Huijsen for 50 million, I think you could sell Kivior for 25, 30 million quid off the back of this season. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. He's a 25-year-old. But ultimately, you know, for a net spend of 20, 25 million quid to go from Kivior to Huijsen, I think that's very good business. And I respect Kivior massively, and I think he's been underrated. But I do think that's a big upgrade. You age down again. And the difference for me between Kivior and Huijsen is the ability to play at right centre-back. And so if I'm looking at our defenders for next season, right, Kieran Tierney's not going to be here. Alexander Zinchenko is most likely not going to be here. There's been plenty of reports about Arsenal really trying to sell him this summer. Tomiyasu will be here, but I effectively consider him as not an Arsenal player in the sense that I don't know when he's going to be available. So that leaves you on this list with 6 defenders, plus you've got Miles Lewis-Skelly as a left-back. And I'm looking at it going, Ben White has his injury issues. Timber has had his injury issues, but they are right backs and right centre backs, and they are the cover for Saliba. And that sounds like depth, right? But it's actually only 3 players to cover 2 positions. That's not insane depth. One of them gets injured, and then effectively the other 2 are playing 90 minutes a week every week. So it's not as much depth as it sounds like. Whereas if you bring in a Huijsen, who can play as a right centre back because he's completely 2-footed, then you've got an extra body that covers that. And the same at left centre-back and left-back. If you've sold Kivior, which in this situation I think you'd have to, you've got Gabriel, you've got Calafiori, and you've got Dean Huijsen. I would assume Dean Huijsen could play as a left-back if he needed to, in the way that our kind of left-backs tend to. And then, of course, you've got Miles Lewis-Skelly as well. And I think that's more beneficial than leaving ourselves in the same position where Kivior is very uncomfortable at right centre-back. I just think big upgrade. You'd have no problems making your money back from him down the line if you needed to sell him anyway. It's a no-brainer. But equally, it's a no-brainer for Liverpool. I would say it's a no-brainer for Real Madrid, apart from the fact that they just don't like to spend money. And so it's very, very difficult for us to win that race. Hopefully we do. It's also not a priority, but it's just one of those things that you do if you can. That's my opinion on it. Let me know yours in the comments. Moving on to Rodrygo. Now, this whole thing is interesting because if you were watching the channel 6 weeks ago and I made that video about alternative Arsenal signings this summer, I spoke about Rodrygo and I spoke about bringing him in as a left winger and I spoke about the reasons I thought you could get him out of Real Madrid. And at the time, that wasn't being spoken about. Like, there was no links from Rodrygo to Arsenal, but it was just something I could see. Now, the last time that happened, if you were following all the way back in 2023, summer 2023, Jurriën Timber. That was the last time I'd kind of spoke about wanting a player that we hadn't been linked to. Anyway, with Rodrygo, Arsenal are one of the clubs that have shown the most interest in Rodrygo and are monitoring his situation ahead of the summer transfer window. Now, this comes from a guy called Edu Burgos. I think he was writing for Diorias. It's not an incredible source. He is South American based. He's got less than 10,000 followers on Twitter. That doesn't always mean a lot, truthfully. But it's not, it's not a Fabrizio. It's not an Ornstein. So take it with a pinch of salt. But there is some interesting stuff going on with Rodrygo at the moment. So Marca reporting Rodrygo reportedly refused to play in the El Clasico on the weekend and would like to leave Real Madrid. The Brazilian feels in the shadow of Bellingham and Mbappe, which is something I've spoken about before. He feels he's not being valued and has been confined to his home for the past few days, upset by his situation. Now, that really is one of the reasons that I spoke about previously as to why I could see him leaving Real Madrid. And according to Marca, at least, that's the case. Now, again, it kind of continued off the back of those reports about him not feeling well or whatever. Fede Valverde's wife replied to one of them and said, "You never know the battles a player is going through. They are human beings. Respect." So make of that what you will. Now, the Real Madrid camp, Ancelotti saying Rodrygo has discomfort in his leg. He's sad for that, but there's really nothing more. He had a fever and didn't train last week, so he wasn't fit. He felt uncomfortable, and we wanted to look at it. Everyone loves Rodrygo, especially me. So obviously there's conflicting reports. Real Madrid are not going to come out and say, yeah, Rodrygo doesn't want to be here anymore, wants to leave, because that puts them in a more difficult position when it comes to negotiations. But he is just a player I look at where the left-wing market is weak. It really is. And when I see us being linked to a Leao or a Nico Williams, like, don't get me wrong, I'd like them, but I don't think they massively propel us beyond Gabby Martinelli, truthfully. Whereas a Rodrygo, I really think he does. He can play centrally, which I think is beneficial. He can play off the right, so we've got that cover for Saka if we need it, because it doesn't sound like we're going to go for a right winger this summer at all. So in one player, you bring in a starting left winger, a backup right winger, and a guy that can play through the middle if necessary. I just think you have to look at that. And it will be expensive. You're talking 100 million quid, I would expect. He's the right age profile. And I just think he is ready to kind of be released from the shackles of Real Madrid. And I would love it. Now, I think people might be getting ahead of themselves. I would be genuinely shell-shocked if we somehow pulled that off this summer, especially with other things that we've got going on. But you never know. You never know. And look, the final bit of news today, this came from John Cross in the Mirror. Sporting have told Arsenal that Gyokeres is all theirs for £60 million. Arsenal ready to offer a contract of more than 200k a week. Now, more than 200k a week is not a lot of money. If you're bringing in a guy to be your starting striker in a squad where theoretically by the end of this summer, if we renew the contracts we want to renew, you're going to have Havertz, who's on 265, Jesus, who's on 265, which continues to be a massive problem for us. But you'd also then have Saka on possibly 300 grand a week, Saliba up there on massive numbers. You'd have Gabriel Magalhaes will be up there on massive numbers. So he'd be coming in as like certainly not your highest paid player. He'd be a middle of the road starting 11 player in terms of his wages. I mean, even Martinelli's on 195k a week. So I don't think those wages are too much at all. I think the fee is very reasonable. And I was saying earlier, like, to be honest, with the striker situation, I'm relatively relaxed for very different reasons. I'd be really excited by Viktor Gyokeres, and I'd also be really excited by Benjamin Sesko. I think long-term, Sesko is a guy that we need to bring in. Every single scouting department, recruitment team, the data teams, they love him, not just at Arsenal, at Liverpool, at Chelsea. So I do think that's a player that you want at your club long-term, but equally in the here and now, who do I trust to come in and bag goals straight off the bat? it's the guy that scores goals at a higher rate than anyone else in Europe at the moment. So, yeah, I'll be happy with either of them. Obviously, Isak maybe is still an option. I think Newcastle United are going to get Champions League, which makes that difficult. But that's where we're at. So that's the news for today. Obviously, there are other odds and sods of, very dubious transfer news sources and stuff that we're not going to bother delving into unless someone more reliable talks about them. But if you've enjoyed the video, please do subscribe. Like I said, like the video, and I'll be back on another one probably tomorrow. Until then, have a fantastic evening, and I will catch you all on the next one. Goodbye.